Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brand John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
You know, John's always trying to make me feel good, and I think it was last week or the week before, he claimed that one of his friends who listens to the show, one of his constituents or one of his compatriots listen to the show, said they love the intro. Is that really true?
That's true, and it was over the weekend, and it was a reporter who folks would know their name. It was not our friend Jason Rosenbaum, so we'll narrow that down. Yeah, and you know how I am. I don't share private messages, but the word that this person used was they said that it slaps. Have you heard that before, Brad? Something slaps?
I have, but it was when I said something not nice to him.
It was when you told the story about a Coke bottle and a public exam.
Right, I got slapped. Okay, that is John Combest, Combest. Spell it out. John is common spelling, John. Put a .com on the end. You got johncombest.com. Every single day for 22 plus years. Coming up next month on 23 years. He's never missed a day. Christmas Day, New Year's Day, I don't care what day it is. He's there putting this up. It's a drudge kind of thing where it's links to a bunch of different stories. No high-tech graphics, nothing like that. Matter of fact, not even any banner ads or anything like that. It's just the meat and potatoes of what's going on in the state of Missouri, politically wise, governmental wise, and sometimes just human interest wise. We start the show off with this guy. His name is...
I'm Casey Kasem.
And we do the top three, and we start off with...
In third place...
A feel-good story, Brad. Let's start off with something that's feel-good that appears to have a happy ending for everybody. This is brought to us by the Health and Wealth Desk at KBIA in Columbia, the public radio station in Columbia. And, Brad, we might want to come back to this in a minute, this particular element, which is that the Health and Wealth Desk is sponsored content, Brad. The Missouri Foundation for Health, which is, I think people would consider to be a pretty progressive health organization, has partnered with the University of Missouri on what's called the Health and Wealth Desk. So they take some pretty progressive advocacy topics, and then they fund someone to write supportive content about those issues. So this is brought to us by a woman named Anna Spidel. My apologies if I get that name wrong. She's from the KBIA. She's paid for. It's kind of a rent-a-reporter deal from the KBIA Health and Wealth Desk. And it's a feel-good story, Brad, because the headline is, New ID Policy Could Hurt Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Missourians, experts and residents say. This goes back to, in some ways, the Lifetime Fitness gym controversy that we talked about in Ellisville. The long and the short of it, Brad, and the reason why this is a feel-good story is, there is a guy from Michigan that came to Missouri to study at Harris Stowe, to get a degree at Harris Stowe. I looked it up. This guy got a degree in urban affairs. So I'm guessing, carjacking and cornbread, I'm guessing. But that's a valuable degree. And this guy says that although he's been in Missouri since coming to Harris Stowe, he is so fed up with Missouri's position on transgender, and he specifically calls out intersex people and non-binary people. He's so fed up with these laws in Missouri that he's going to go back to his home state of Michigan. And the key quote here, I think he says that, I came there, coming to Missouri, to be empowered by getting a degree, but I felt so powerless because my voice isn't heard. I'm not affirmed here. So we know that the Constitution protects your right to be affirmed, Brad. It's right up there with the First Amendment. You have a right to free speech and the right to be affirmed wherever you go. So anyway, this guy's going back to Michigan, and I think it's the kind of story, Brad, that we look at. You have taught us a lot over the last 9 months about the law of unintended consequences. And so maybe this is intended, maybe it's non-intended, but if you are a transgender activist or you're an intersex or non-binary activist and you feel that Missouri is not properly affirming you, perhaps you should go back to wherever you came from.
Okay, John, that begs the question, what does he want as affirmation? I mean, am I missing something here? Is he getting like
No, you're not missing anything, Brad. I guess he wants a state where he's on a board, a transgender board. I'm guessing, it's not working out. I'm guessing the board that he's on or what he's doing, maybe they're not getting enough money. Maybe they're not getting enough grant funding. Who knows? But I mean, I do think so. First of all, let's be blunt here. No one has a right to be affirmed. You don't have a right to be affirmed. I don't have a right to be affirmed. And if you're looking at a state's law, I don't expect Missouri state government to make me feel like I'm a valuable person or that my life has meaning or that I am a precious child in the eyes of the Lord. Like I don't look to Missouri state government for that. But some people do, Brad. Some people want the government, I guess, to give them a hug. We've talked before on this show, a lot of times when people look to government to tell them what to do, a lot of times that could be a daddy issue. They want a hug from Big Daddy government. So I don't know, Brad. That's a long-winded way of saying no. We don't owe anybody affirmation.
Well, but I don't even know what that means. I mean, the point being, like, if I wake up in the morning, as a matter of fact, I was in Jefferson City on Tuesday, okay? If I wake up in the morning and I go, like, I'm going to Jefferson City, and I, went from office to office. I started at Secretary of State, which is to get up there at Main Street. That's the first one you hit, the Kirkpatrick building. And I walked into the place and I go, I want to be affirmed. They'd look at me like, okay, what does that mean? You know what I mean? I mean, they would.
Yeah, I know exactly.
They don't know what that means.
And the word affirm, by the way, is used several times in this piece of content.
I just don't understand this stuff. I mean, you can go to California, and there are places that are, we focus so much on Southern California and even Northern California with San Francisco, but, the whole lifestyle of California. Well, the interesting part of that is there's a whole different part of California that's farm territory, and what people don't realize is, along the coast, you got San Francisco and Los Angeles and San Diego and places like that, but you go inland, and if you've ever driven California, it's a huge agricultural area. I mean, and
yes, it is.
And once again, it's not all the crazy weird stuff you see going on in San Francisco. They're farmers like they're farmers here in Missouri. Salt of the earth kind of guys and gals who are working the land, taking the risk every year that the crops are going to, turn out to be something, and that type of thing. And it's to the point where my point being, like, you go to California and say, well, I don't feel comfortable here because there's a lot of farmers. Yeah, there's a lot of farmers, but go to San Francisco and there's a lot of weirdos. You know what I'm saying? It depends.
I know exactly what you mean. I would be remiss if I didn't point out every one of those farmland acres in California is so valuable because all those crops are high value crops. God bless our farmers, let's say here in Franklin County, but an acre to produce corn and soy is not like an acre to produce almonds. Like, there's some high value crops out there, Brad.
But see, that because of the fact your background with Monsanto and Bayer, that when I talk about, I think sometimes people miss this whole thing. When you mention California, people think of surfing and, and along the coast and
Hollywood.
Right, Hollywood and Malibu and San Francisco. But you've been to California. You've seen the agriculture there. You've been out in the middle of fields where you're miles and miles and miles away from civilization. Am I kidding or what?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's high value stuff. And let's get back to affirming real quick, Brad. I think that the notion of affirming people is absolutely essential in your personal life, in your friendships, in your romantic relationships, in your relationships with your children, maybe even with your parents. Like, to let people know that they're being heard and that you hear them and you understand. At least you have some kind of a desire to understand where they're coming from. The government doesn't owe me any sort of affirmation whatsoever, and I can't imagine the mindset of looking toward my state, federal, or local government and saying, I need Sam Page to affirm me.
But see, this points out the whole problem with what has happened on so many levels in our society is that people look to the government for everything. And, it's funny. I was thinking about just the other day. Okay, I'll give you two scenarios, okay? I spent a lot of time in Washington and that area, in the Augusta area, stuff like that. Okay, if there's a storm that rolls through, and I personally have witnessed this, and I personally have been on one of those crews. If there's a storm that rolls through, and there's a bunch of trees that fall down and block the highway, okay, guess what happens? The local people jump in their trucks, throw their chainsaws in the back of their truck. They go down, they chop up the tree, and they push the tree out of the way, and they open up the street, okay? In Ladue, if a tree falls over on Warson Road or something like that, do you think there's any dude or dudette and ladude that's going to jump into their car or jump into their Mercedes and throw a chainsaw in the back of their car and go chop that tree up and get it out of the way? Okay, my point being is that in certain areas, people essentially say, look, it's me, it's all up to me. It's me and my fellow citizens. We're going to get together and we're going to solve this problem. In other areas, it's like, okay, the government's going to make everything good. Am I making a point? Does that make any sense to you?
First of all, I'm disgusted by your toxic masculinity. The symbolism of chainsaws. Although I would like to chop down a few chicks in Ladue, but that's a completely different story, Brad. Secondly, all your talk about libertarianism, we have a listener with the initial CP who's looking for a Coke bottle right now, Brad. You're getting her a little too excited. Can we move into story number 2?
Okay, John, here we go.
Up a notch to number 2.
Okay, number 2.
I meant, by the way, that our friend CP is looking for caffeine in the morning, Brad.
Okay, I got
Story
you.
number 2. Helly Jones, who is a key player in Governor Parsons' administration, joins a list of folks who are leaving the office a little bit early. You know, the governor's not technically done until January, Brad. I bring this up today because last week, Governor Parsons' chief of staff, a gentleman named Aaron Willard, a fine gentleman, and Kelly Jones, by the way, is a fine woman. These folks have given a life to public service. They're moving on. In Aaron Willard's case, he's kind of decreasing his hours, so to speak, and he's serving in an advisory role. But I bring this up today, Brad, because we see as we get into the fall and move into the winter, we're going to see more and more folks exit their official positions and Governor Parsons' administration and look for new things to do. Kelly Jones, for example, is going to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I think most observers of Missouri government would say, Lord knows that the education group needs a little bit of help. So we're going to continue to see an exodus of some of the top minds. And at the same time, folks will be jockeying for positions in Governor Mike Kehoe's administration as he comes in January, Brad.
So what do you think that's going to be? What kind of administration do you think he's going to have? And you know all the players, who's going to be his chief of staff? Can you look into John's crystal ball and throw out some names?
Yeah. I mean, I probably wouldn't talk about. If I knew folks that were close to the lieutenant, I mean, if I knew of folks that were close to the lieutenant governor that would be natural fits for it, I think we could speculate that folks who are key members of the campaign, Brad, would probably be key members of the administration.
Isn't that the way it always is? You go back and look at.
Well, yeah, usually, but sometimes you'll bring in an outsider. But you're right. To answer your original question, though, Brad, Kehoe is going to be a fantastic governor, and he's going to be kind of a backboard to play against, I think, for some Republicans. And by that, I mean, if you're super Republican, you're going to come out and you're going to talk about how Kehoe is not conservative enough. He's not doing enough right-wing stuff, which is what some folks did with Governor Mike Parson. And that only strengthens Mike Kehoe because he's able to say, look, I'm not with these crazies over here, but I'm a pretty mainstream Republican. I'm going to focus on crime. I'm going to focus on immigration, just like I said I'm going to do. He's going to be a great governor. And I know a lot of my dear friends on the far right spent the last year campaigning against him, but Mike Kehoe is going to be a fantastic governor.
Now, did somebody pay you to say that, or is that coming from your heart?
I really think so.
No, I mean,
yeah, he's going to be fantastic.
I mean, you're gushing about the guy. I mean, what if he turns out to be a dud?
Well, Brad, I generally don't go through life saying, what if I'm wrong about something? In fact, I co-host a radio show with a guy who describes himself as a disruptor, who takes a lot of risks. I don't think that co-host of mine gets up every morning saying, what if this doesn't work out? What if a politician lets me down? God forbid. Speaking of Brad Hildebrand, by the way, Brad, in the first 30 seconds of Scott Faughn's midweek update yesterday, he gave you 2 shout-outs in the first 30 seconds.
No way. About what?
I'm not telling you. You got to watch it yourself. Why? I'm not your clipping service. You got it. It's called johncombest.com. Go figure it out.
There aren't any clipping services anymore. They're all gone.
And youngsters are like, clipping?
Yeah.
Did you use scissors? Yes, we did.
Should we explain that for the young audience out there?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I can start. Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
When I worked both as an intern in the year of our Lord 1997 in the House Committee on Small Business, my literal job, first thing in the morning, was to get in with the other crew of interns, and I would take a pair of scissors, and I would go through the Washington Post and the Washington Times and every other print publication, and I would take a pair of scissors and I would cut out the articles because there were no online versions. And then you cut them out, and you go over to the copy machine, and you try to lay it out clearly, and God forbid the back of the story is on the other side of the page in the Washington Post, because then you got to try to figure out how to copy it and then cut it and do it again. And then eventually, and here's the kicker, I'd put them all together and we'd send them on a fax machine and we'd fax it to all the people that had to have the clips. And then people would get the clips and they'd go to the printer and they'd pick up a few trees worth. And then they'd read the clips of the day. And God forbid a story breaks at 9 o'clock after stories have already come out, because then you're shoot out of luck. So that's why they're called clips.
And the clipping services were companies that did that, where if you essentially called up a clipping service and you said, I want anything to do with zoning in St. Louis County, that what would happen was on a regular basis, they would send you usually, back before fax machines, usually in the mail in a couple of days, you would get an envelope which would have, like you talked about, it would be stories cut out of the paper, and it would be put on a copier machine, and they would send you the copies of that, and that would be what you'd pay for, clipping service. Now it's got to be all digital stuff. There's probably companies that do that digitally, where they send you an email.
For sure.
Here's all the links, the things that you are concerned about. But essentially, the sad part of it is most people can do that themselves just by like Google search or a Bing search or something like that. So anyway, okay, number one.
The number one.
It's a Brad Hildebrand special because it deals not only with politics, but it deals with legal stuff and it deals with media companies. Brad, I included this as number one, not just because it's a big story, but I think it's telling about the state of campaigns in Missouri and nationwide. David Wasinger, who is the successful candidate for lieutenant governor, he's going to be the next lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri. He dropped a defamation lawsuit yesterday, Brad, and he had originally filed this defamation suit on August 2nd because a political action committee was saying stuff about him that he said was not true. So let's level set there for a minute. David sees an ad, and people are saying stuff about him that's clearly not true. And in this example, Lincoln Hough's PAC, which was called appropriately Lincoln PAC, they funded an ad that said that David Wasinger was a, quote, abortion-loving Democrat. So pretty thin evidence, God bless Lincoln, but pretty thin evidence that David Wasinger would be an abortion-loving Democrat. So David's like, oh, hell no. Files suit on August 2nd. And Brad, he filed suit against Gray Television, which actually owns, a number of TV stations. I'm sorry, Hearst Television. I said Gray. My mistake. Hearst Television stations, which ran the ad. He asked the judge to have Hearst pull the ads off TV and award him $25,000 in damages. Now, this is, as knuckle-dragging troglodytes would say, a moot point. Actually, a moot point. It's a moot point because David won the primary. And you know what? You win the primary, all is forgiven, so he drops the suit. But I think it's really interesting that in an era in which, for example, Brad, I don't believe anything I see on TV. If you tell me that Mike Kehoe loves China and Bill Eigel loves China more and Jay Ashcroft bows to Chairman Mao every morning, I don't believe it. So I don't believe anything I see in a commercial. But this is unique, I think, Brad, because you have a candidate that says, this stuff is so over the top wrong that I'm going to file a lawsuit. And we should point out that David is an attorney. So, Brad, what do you think about this? Do you think more candidates should just go to a judge and say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to let them call me XYZ?
Well, there's two aspects of this. Is first off, we've talked about this before, that as far as the FCC is concerned, if it's a broadcast ad on radio and television, us as the broadcasters cannot censor anything a candidate brings to us. If a candidate would bring, if Jay Nixon would bring, if he was going to advertise with me, which he didn't, but if he did, and he got an ad, and he goes, and the ad starts off, Jay, says, that Mike Kehoe, he's a MF, but he didn't say MF, he said the word.
Yeah.
Okay. We would have to run that commercial exactly as it is. So there's a point of that where it's to the point where, like, I think, isn't it almost pretty much like a given that when you're in the political, battlefield, that all's fair in love and war kind of stuff? You know what I mean? I mean,
I think so. But, if I'm David, and I didn't see what David's arguments were for this, to be fair, but if I'm David and I consider myself a man of faith, and and someone's saying that I support abortion, if I support the killing of a human life, I think that's different than saying
David Wasinger will raise your taxes.
I think it's probably a little bit different, Brad.
Man, I tell you what, politics. We have to finish up this segment. We're running a little bit long. Next break, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about the town hall last night that was supposed to be the debate, which didn't materialize?
Yeah, that's all I've seen are social media clips. I didn't watch it, Brad.
And neither did I. But
I was busy. I was out on the Hamburg Trail, so I didn't have time to.
Were you really out in the trail? You sent me that picture. Were you really out in the trail?
I was, yeah. I was out there.
So you were out in St. Charles County.
I was. It's God's country.
Right. See, and once again, I put that up, and I know you're not a Facebook guy, but I stopped by that cemetery. Did I talk about this? A couple weeks ago, I stopped by.
You did, yeah. But I mean, I was in bush wildlife.
Right. Well, but that's not that. Once again, that area is right down the street from where Hamburg and Tunerville and Hough used to all be. All those cities which are now gone. I mean, matter of fact, that a lot of that area is the old cities of Hamburg and Tunerville and Hough. I mean, that whole area was sort of that area out there. Anyway, it's like people call so many people. I live in Defiance. Well, Defiance is a little tiny town. Actually, it's a CDP. It's not even an official town or anything like that. But if you live 20 miles from Defiance, people say, I live in Defiance, because it's like the cool place to live now.
And if you dislike what Brad said, write him in his office in Meacham Park.
Okay. I'm the guy that when I go to Nevada, I want to go to Paradise. I don't want to go to Las Vegas. I want to go to Paradise. People go, where's Paradise? There's a whole story behind that.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?